Anyway, we're going to dive back into our series that we've been talking about all through January here called Better Time. And today we're going to look at this idea of no more. Back in April of 2019, I had a really difficult decision to make about coaching football. See, coaching was, and coaching is, a deep passion of mine. If you've talked with me ever, you know I love football. And really, I love all team sports. There's something about that camaraderie. In coaching at our high school here in Greenville, it gave me a great sense of that belonging that I'm always kind of looking for. It gave me a place to be. I got to interact with like 100 young men every season. And I got to hang out with like 8 other dudes in the coaching office. Coaching it was a good thing. But things were changing in life. Kids were getting older. There was just a lot of chaos. And coaching, honestly, doesn't pay much for the amount of hours that you give to it. And so I had to make a decision. And saying no to something that is good or something that might actually just not fall into your most current priority, you guys know that. That's one of the hardest things to do. So I put off telling Coach Davis, at the time was the head varsity football coach, I put it off as long as I possibly could to tell him no. And I did tell him no. That was hard, that I couldn't coach any longer. But in saying that difficult no, it did lead to some really fun opportunities to say yes to these good things in my life. And the biggest one that I just got done talking about is I became good friends. It freed up my schedule to become good friends with Pete McGowan down at Third Wave Coffee. All of a sudden, I had a little more time in my schedule, and so I began to hang out there a little more and develop a friendship and then get to actually be trained up on how to roast coffee and how to be a barista and how to do this stuff. And it discovered in my life, it really brought out a passion, not just for coffee, but for what coffee represents. It's the coming together. There's hospitality, there's service, there's honest conversation. And now, as you know, I could just keep going on about coffee, but I promise I won't. But it is truly a passion that has come out of that, in just that setting, that what happens over a tasty latte with one another. Another couple opportunities I've had are different small groups and different learning situations, and those have been really good and beneficial to me. And then one other is that I've been able to be part of this, what is called Chapter 4 Institute, where I've been traveling around the country a little bit with our National Church of God office, a group of these folks, and learning there. And that's even kind of where the Tove Cafe came out of. It's not easy to say no to good things, but it does open us up for other opportunities. As we have discussed and been establishing over the past few weeks, even though life in the first century was significantly different than today, Jesus did have to deal with real human limitations. He had people pulling him in a lot of different directions, and he had to decide to act on what was most important. And now, here this week, on January 23rd, we're going to jump back in. And we're going to examine how Jesus had many things competing for his consideration. And yet, Jesus was able to discern what was most essential and maybe what was a little less important in the midst of a lot of distractions around him. Just consider with me here before we get to our main text, just for a moment, how Jesus could say no to the crowds of people that were coming to him for healing. This is God in flesh. He had the power to restore all of these people. We're even told in different stories, he had the power to heal them from a distance even, which is neat. So how did Jesus choose between yes and no? And this morning we're going to look out of an account out of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, right at the beginning of the Gospel account. I realized yesterday after I sent the email that I said Mark 1, 29 through 29. Hopefully you caught that error, that there should have been a 3 there. It's through 39. But here we go. You can follow along here as we read this account together. It says this: as soon as they, and this is Jesus and his followers, mostly the disciples here, they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the house of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her. He took her hand and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door. And Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up. He left the house and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him. And when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. So here's the scene. After driving out some evil spirits at the synagogue, Jesus then goes and he heals Simon, who is Peter, you might know him more as. He heals Peter's mother-in-law. And then he begins to heal a bunch of the neighbors there as well. And so that would have probably been a pretty taxing night. And so the next day, as one might expect, even more of the villagers are there and they want Jesus to heal them. But where was Jesus? Jesus is off in solitude. He's off in silence. He's finding some stillness to pray, to have that space to really take a break and to think. So the disciples, they come to him and they let him know that, hey, all these people, they really would love you to come back. There's a lot more need in this town. But Jesus says, no. And you might go, what? And you ask yourself, why? But Jesus had already committed his time to a bigger yes. I want us to check it out, and it won't be up on the screen, but this is his response one more time to the request of more time in that village. He says, let us go somewhere else, to nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come. See, Jesus understood his purpose. He knew who he was, and that allowed him to take that long list of things that he could do and edit that down to the things that he should do in order to carry out the work and the purposes that he had been born to do. Jesus had his identity dialed in. He had his work prioritized. He wasn't interested and he wouldn't be led astray to be the little king of a little village. That wasn't part of what he was going to do. Nope, he was focused on the better things, the most important desires and tasks. So, how does that relate to us today? Well, I think that many of us are frozen by trying to decide where to best spend our time. We are flooded with a lot of options of how to spend our days, and make no mistake, just like my coaching example, most of them are really good. They're good things. Just like Jesus, too, in this main text. It's good. But too much noise and too many choices and too many obligations, they tend to leave us paralyzed when it comes to making an actual decision. So, that's what we're going to talk about this morning. And I'll be honest, if I can, before we even jump in, this was a hard sermon to get to even this level to share it with you, to this moment. Because this is a challenging topic for so many of us. How do we prioritize our yes and our no? How do we actually do this and find ourselves living time better? And so the first thing we're going to talk about is that we have to choose our yes. We choose our yes. And with that said, the fact remains as we think about yes, all yeses are not created equal. Not every activity or job or concern carries equal weight. So the question that many of us are wrestling with is how can we, modeled like Jesus, identify the yeses that matter the most, and then being able to say no to the less desirable things. Now, unfortunately, a lot of us, we are a bit more reactive than proactive with our time and our priorities. But choosing the better yes and our better no, because that can go vice versa, is vitally important, because saying no to things, oh boy, especially the ones that aren't in essence, bad. They're just not as good. But saying no to things gives opportunities then to choose the better yes. But in order to do that, you see, choosing means that you and I have to fully know the options in order that we could be proactive about weighing the choices and then making an actual decision. Here is the real heart of the matter for many of us, though. It is far too easy for people to fall into the pattern of wanting to say yes to everything that sounds good. I see a few heads nod. I'll say it one more time. It's pretty easy to fall into the pattern of saying yes to everything that sounds or seems good. It's a positive. And this is why it's important for us, as we've been talking, let's be honest, we've been talking about these themes for a long time, but really just the last 2 weeks we've been hammering at this, that we have to slow ourselves. We have to live with a pace that allows us the time to check the yes or the no that we are committing to. And we have to check that it aligns with our current priorities. Maybe that's your spiritual life priorities. Maybe it's your work life, your professional part of your time. Maybe it's just in your home life, your personal life. And goodness, I hope you're checking on your mental health at times, really examining yourself. See, this is so crucial that we have been talking about it these previous couple of weeks, because it helps us answer if we are saying yes to a better desire and not just simply giving a sure to something which causes us to then have to say no to something we would actually much rather do, much rather be a part of. So basically what I'm getting at here is that when we are trying to prioritize yes and no in our lives, it's key that we understand the driving force behind the choices that we are making. And what I'm talking about, you see it right there, is motivation. What is the motivation driving your yes or your no? As humans, I think we fall into this trap of unwanted yeses and unwanted nos due to a host of reasons. And these are just a few. It can happen because we have a fear of looking like we don't care enough. It may be that we're trying to avoid hurting someone's feelings. Sometimes we say yes too much for fear of missing out, which gets abbreviated FOMO. Maybe that's familiar to you. Fear of missing out. And other times it's this dreaded word. It's obligation. Oof. I don't like that one. That one hits a little too close to home. If I stepped on your toes at all, that one steps on my toes, because I have a habit of saying yes because I feel required to do so. Feels like obligation. But here's the deal. If you and I, folks, if we're choosing yes or no based on things like FOMO, fear of missing out, or avoiding hurt feelings, or trying to make people believe you care more than you do, or trying to prove your self-worth to others, I got news for you. If you're operating out of that motivation, you will never be, those yeses will never be as satisfying as you want them to be. And your no's that you give out of that same reasoning will often leave you wondering, what if? They'll leave you with regret. This is because fulfilling a role, okay, becoming an actor is fulfilling a role for ourselves and for others. Folks, that never deeply satisfies and fulfills what we're looking for. We talked about that week 1 in this message series, that deep need for fulfillment. We can't play a role. We can't do it for others. And another harsh reality that goes right along with what is our motivation that we have to ask is to talk about trade-offs. Because choosing your yes or no, when you do that, there is always a trade-off. Choosing yes or no for a decision that is right now, or maybe immediate, we'd say, or longer range, deciphering between that, it's basically like not buying something small so that you can save up for something better. Are you with me on that? I have to have that conversation with my kids all the time, especially the big-haired kid, because And I think he's done. I loved it. I only have like another year of this, by the way. I can't pick on him as readily coming soon once Henry is more up here. But Henry's terrible about it. He just wants the thing right now, this little thing, instead of saving up. And his sister's the opposite. So Evelyn always has a bunch of money to buy the cool big things, and Henry's getting a pack of gum. And maybe that's relatable for you, because I feel that way too. I'm a bit of an impulse shopper and an impulse buyer. Okay? I like the immediate reward instead of delayed gratification. But author and theologian Henry Nouwen, he says it like this. And I think I put, okay, good. If I were to let my life be taken over by what is urgent, I might very well never get around to what is essential. There's a thing called the Eisenhower decision matrix, and it is credited to President Eisenhower, based on a quote of his, but then someone talked about a decision matrix. And in this, it discusses the difference between what is important, or what Henry Nouwen would say essential, and what is urgent. And this is how they describe it. Important activities are those with an outcome that leads us towards our goals and our deepest desires. Urgent activities demand immediate attention and usually have to deal with someone else's goals. In other words, the urgent is rarely important, and the important is rarely urgent. Are you with me on that? I know it's a little confusing. I thought about putting that all up there, but then you'd be reading it and we wouldn't be having a conversation. So the urgent is rarely important, and the important is rarely urgent. So the question we have to ask ourselves is this: what am I willing to say no to if I say yes to other activities or tasks? Or another way to phrase that is, what am I hoping to say yes to in the future that will release me right now to say no? I already alluded to it during our prayer time, but we talked about this last week, how limited, how finite our brains are, right? Our minds cannot hold everything. We cannot just keep adding to our lives without some element of removal. But if we're going to be extra honest, which I think we always are, so I don't know why I give that disclaimer, but even more of an honest truth is this: we all like to think that we can do that, right? Just keep adding stuff. We just keep saying yes. All the while we're hoping that it doesn't just completely cave us in and we're overwhelmed by it. But overcommitting usually does just that. So it may seem like, our yeses and therefore nos and how we're carrying this around, that this doesn't have a lot to do with Jesus. But if you dive into the gospel accounts, if you're familiar with that, you can read it about his life. It's obvious that he was clear on which work was most important. And because of that, he was able to prioritize what he was going to do with his limited time on earth. And while we're at it, I think, why did Jesus have to deal with these trade-offs and how he spent his time, right? But he did, and it's evident as we read that too. And I question that, why would he have to? Because he's God, right? Couldn't he just heal everybody in one fell swoop? Couldn't he have just had one massive Billy Graham-like crusade kind of gathering and got everybody saved? I mean, couldn't he do that, right? Whereas God is omnipresent, which means God is everywhere. He's universal. Jesus, being human, like us, he couldn't be in two places at the same time. He was singularly present. And yes, there were definitely times that Jesus seems to welcome distractions and all the commotion that came with his line of work. I mean, the dude did have a gathering everywhere he went. But other times, Jesus made a really significant effort to eliminate or even just disallow the interruptions and the noise. And I want to look at a quick account here out of Matthew's Gospel in chapter 12, and you can read along with me. It says this: while Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside wanting to speak with you." I love how we get the repeat there. He replied to him, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Now, the main point of this passage, is what Jesus is telling us about who exactly is and is not his family. I mean, I love that passage. He lays it out. But what I want us to check out is the interesting other point to this text. I mean, what's going on here is Jesus is working, we would say. He is specifically talking to the crowd. One of the purposes that he was absolutely sent to do. And then Jesus is now kind of interrupted a little bit on the side and was told that his family was waiting. And notice what his response wasn't. He didn't say, "Well," he pulled a Porky Pig, "that's all, folks. And we've got lunch plans and we got a reservation. And so we got to get out of here. They're ready for me. I've got to go with my family." He didn't do that, right? Now that would be kind of funny if he did. But he did not. Jesus continued teaching. See, in that moment, he was fully present and called to work on that task, to talk with this crowd. And he remained totally focused and locked in with the people that he was teaching. Now, on the other hand, consider that Jesus often saw through the crowds in order to focus in on one. We alluded to this account last week very quickly about the woman who suffered from prolonged bleeding. And in that account, specifically the one out of Luke 8, Jesus is moving with a crowd, and he's leading his group of followers. And all of a sudden, this woman slips in and touches the edge of his garment. And immediately, her bleeding comes to an end. In that moment, Jesus stops, and he asks, "Who touched him?" And now it's kind of a funny moment there, at least I read some humor into that, because Peter's like, "What do you mean, who touched you? We're in a giant crowd. Everyone's touching you." Oh, it's like being at a bad rock concert, right? Like, sweaty bodies. It'd be terrible. So Peter's like, "What?" And then Jesus turns to this woman who would have been considered unclean in that society's standards because of the bleeding, and who then, by association, would have made Jesus unclean. But Jesus turns to her, and he tells her, "Your faith has healed you. Go in peace." See, in that moment, she was the better yes, even though he had to break his attention to be in that space with her. Now, I can't help but notice, as I read throughout the gospel messages, that it appears like Jesus operated with some real inconsistencies. It just seems like that. He would take time for this person over here, but not the next. He healed a lot of people, but not everyone. Even our opening account talked about that. He called many to follow him. But others, just like we've already heard again today, he said, "We'll keep this secret. Don't go telling anybody." I mean, these are real head scratchers. Hopefully you've pondered that before too. But in prioritizing the bigger yes, which I would say doing what the Father had sent him to do, is what Jesus was all about. That was always the bigger yes. That's what you see in John chapter 5. That's what you see as he kind of rolls out his mission statement in Luke chapter 4. But in prioritizing the bigger yes, accepting his limitations to being present only in one space at a time, we actually realize that Jesus was being incredibly consistent. Jesus was human. He had finite amount of attention and time just like us. So what did he do? He prayed for discernment. He kept the bigger work in view, and he accepted his limitations. I mean, goodness, this is the same Jesus who is found sleeping in a boat when there's going to be a storm going on. That's crazy. He would go away in silence and solitude and stillness all the time to pray. See, the cool part about this, what I want you to see right there, is that in not doing everything for everyone, Jesus set an example for us for choosing between what is good and what is better. And then doing the real work, committing to being fully present with whichever he chose. This week, as I was actually in the middle of some sermon prep when I got the call, I had an opportunity to, Andy Hurst called me and had a family that needed a pastor to do a funeral for a family. And so I get this call, which is kind of funny, in the middle of actually doing some work, taking some notes, doing some studying for this message. And so he gives me the info, and I quickly had to kind of make a decision. He never presses me to do that, but I know he's got things to do too. So I quickly made a decision. Sure, I think I've got the time this week. And so then he gives me the information to contact the family to set up a time to meet together. So I do that. I call them that same time because I'm just going to do it right then. And I called this family, and the day that I was doing this, and we had a few things going on around here, and there were other pressing things going on, I didn't want to meet with the family that day. But sure enough, I call the family, and that's the best day to meet with that family because a family member of them was going to be leaving to go back to the east side of the state until the funeral. And so to actually get together to plan the memorial service, it'd be nice to have all of those people there. So long story short, because it's hard to make these short, I had to make a pretty quick decision. Was I going to sit aside sermon prep? Was I going to cancel the evening plans I had? Was I going to set aside some things, postpone what I had in the fire to go meet with this family so that all of the siblings could be present to help plan their father's memorial service? Seems like, as a pastor, that should be a pretty easy one, right? It's not. You see, it's really easy for us to get caught up. Oh, maybe I should relieve the tension there. I did go meet with them, and it was really good. And I still got all the things I needed to get done. Sorry, everyone's like, well, what did he do? Sorry. Maybe that would have been a good place. We'll just leave you hanging on that. Ooh, suspenseful. What did he decide? Yeah, so I did. And the truth is, it was really important because it was the sister who wouldn't have been able to be there, and she shared a few stories that had a different angle about their dad that actually really helped me be able to speak about this man's life that I'd never met. So it was good. It was good that I said yes, but my initial reaction was like, I don't think I have time for this. Like, no, but it was good. But it's really easy for us, right, to get caught up in those extremely long to-do lists that we have because we're all trying to be responsible people. And that means we want to get all of our tasks done. There are so many things that are pressing against us and demanding us to disregard or overlook the now for the concern of what we can or what we should or what we even need to get done. And it's a real test for each of us to be present in the everyday in what we might even feel is like just an average moment of life. But as we've discussed throughout this month, being more fulfilled and being more satisfied in life doesn't mean doing more. And therefore, it doesn't come from simply working harder. That kind of satisfaction and fulfillment actually comes from the freedom to do what we care about most. This is what Paul, the Apostle Paul, is trying to tell to the early church in Philippi. He writes this way in Philippians 2:13. He says this, "For it is God who is at work in you, both to desire and to work for his good pleasure." You see, our human desires are actually God-given passions and purposes for the good of yourself and then for bringing beauty, to bringing love and harmony and goodness to the world around us. See, our desires go beyond the more surface level feelings that we often think they are. Sometimes desires get a bad rap in the church because we think it's just feelings. No, desires go much deeper, and they are the actual substance of who you are and what you've been created for. I'll be honest, folks, this is a hard message to try to give you answers. Because that's what we've all been trained a little bit, right? Like, okay, so what's the answers? How do we do this yes and no? It's hard. This is hard work. But I still want us to think about just a touch more here as we wrap up today. How can we prioritize our yes and no and accept our limitations of being present in one place at a time? We've been giving you little handles along the way these last 2 weeks about stillness, about meditation, about reading Scripture, about even serving others as a possible way forward. We've been talking about breaking from all the noise and all the distractions. And those are all precursors to what now I'm going to ask you to do. And the first question of our actionable steps is this you have to deal with is what are the real priorities in your life? In order to answer this question, the truth is you really have to know who you are. You have to know what your identity is. You have to know what your deepest and best desires are. Sometimes that looks like, and this could even be a list that you would make, of making a list of the things that you most come alive with, the things that just fuel you up. And then also keeping track of what drains your energy, what depletes you. See, then you have to go, I heard that, Bruce. That was awesome. Then you have to ask yourselves this, though, as you sit with those questions and you begin to really search, what is my identity? What most charges me up and what just drains me? Then you have to ask yourself about the current way you are living. What are you willing to say no to? And what are the more fulfilling and life-giving things that you desire to say yes to? See, the real task with knowing deeply who we are is that we have to tell ourselves the truth always. You don't get to dance around reality. I mean, I think we're pretty good at that. We're good at faking it. We're good at tricking ourselves, telling us a little bit better story, making us the hero of the story sometimes. But that doesn't help. It just pushes the issue off longer. See, we have to deal with reality in hopes that we will actually be able to make the best yes decision or the best no decision. And so we have to practice that. We have to practice being a truth teller with ourselves, and absolutely you have to practice being a truth teller with other people as well. Back in the fall of 2018, just a quick story, we are almost to the end. But I had a big decision to make, and it wasn't one that I had to make the full, all-in, jump in with both feet commitment right away, but I had to kind of keep saying yes. It was a process. And so I did that. It felt like I had arrows in my life that were kind of flashing, saying, yeah, go this way. Say yes. Do that. So I did that, and kind of step by step, I did that. And, it's one of those decisions where you make it, and then a few more people know about it. So now you've got other people kind of depending on you, and they know what's going on. And so eventually, all these yeses are good, and we get into this, we're diving kind of deep, and then something changed. And all of a sudden, those flashing arrows that were pointing towards yes became a no. But at that point, I had gotten myself into the yes quite a ways. People were depending on that yes. They were counting on it. And I had to say no. And I'll tell you, that was one of the hardest no's I've ever said because, again, it goes back to some of our motivations. Man, I was being pushed not just by what was my deepest desire at that point. I was considering an awful lot of other people's thoughts and opinions and how they would feel. It's not like that's wrong. We should consider others. But when we're trying to prioritize the best yes and a little less on these other options, you may have to let some people down when you say no. And it hurts. And this brings me to just our last thought here a little bit about an actionable step is this idea of a clearness committee. And maybe you're in that place where you are aware in your own life that you have some no's that need to be said. You're in a space where you want to have some room for a new yes, even if you don't know what the new yes is yet. But you're just not quite sure what to do. Well, a clearness committee, or what we might even just call co-listeners, it's a group of friends that will help you discern and process what you are wrestling with. And it really is as simple as that. It's gathering a couple people that you know, that they know you. And you can begin talking about the things that are on your minds, your questions that you're wrestling with, this no or this yes that you are sitting with, not sure quite which direction to go yet. It's a work of of doing the effort of truth-telling, and you do it in community. And I don't want to talk any more further about that to get us derailed at all, but if you're interested in that, there's some great stuff from Emily P. Freeman in The Next Right Thing. She's our author of that. She does a podcast, and she talks about this. So I'd love if that sounds like something, you right now, you have a no or a yes in your life, and you're not sure where to go, and you'd like a little more info about that, be glad to talk to you afterwards. That's this idea of clearness committee, like being with other people. Because here's the truth of it all. Friends, we are not alone in this work of prioritizing our fulfilling yeses and saying no to draining issues. You're not alone. This is a hard topic to talk about because we all experience this every single day. There's somebody that wants your time, wants your effort, and it doesn't align up with what you want. Your deepest desires. So you're not alone. But you do have to do this. You have to be brave enough to allow God to care for you deeply. You have to be courageous enough to know yourself well. You have to ask some of those hard questions of yourself. And then you're going to have to be bold enough to seek some discernment with others. See, in finding our best yes, okay, really finding that and being able to say no more often, we may find that we're being called to not only better our time with the work ahead of us, but possibly we might be being led an entirely different direction from what we have been doing. It's even possible that God would allow something that kind of knocks us off our current course so that we can see, and so we can hear, and we can listen to Him even more fully as He leads us in a better direction. So, church family, what I'm asking of you is that will you commit to this? And what that really looks like, will you commit to giving one another as we do family together? Will you commit to giving each other space to prioritize their yes? And that means to say no as well. Will you please rally to one another's side when they need someone to be a co-listener with them? They just need someone to come along and express some care and help them process what feels overwhelming. See, it's in that work, in this family, that we become more able to prioritize our best yes and say no, at least for now, to even all those things that are really good. Let's do that work together. Let's pray.